Imagine a person who weighs like an adult reindeer. As for their height, it is almost like two adults stacked one on the other. This is exactly what Robert Pershing Wadlow looked like. This American dude was the tallest person ever recorded, standing at a whopping 8 foot 11.1 inches tall and weighing 439 pounds. Growing up, Wadlow was always the tallest kid in the room. At the age of 8, he was already as tall as his dad. And at the age of 9, he was strong and big enough to carry his own father. By the time he graduated high school, he had already grown to be 8 foot 4 inches tall. As for job prospects, he intended to become a lawyer, and he even enrolled in college. But his height let him have a few side hustles. First, circus performers that made him a celebrity in no time. Second, in 1938, he kicked off a promo tour with the International Shoe Company, snagging free shoes along the way. Wadlow wasn't about that freak show life. He saw himself as a walking ad for the company. Because of his huge stature, he needed to wear special braces on his legs to help him walk. He never used a wheelchair, but walking was definitely a big struggle for him. Sadly, an infection from a faulty brace led to his untimely demise in 1940. His coffin was so huge that it took 12 pallbearers and 8 assistants to carry it. To this day, a life-size statue of Wadlow stands tall in Alton, his hometown. Throughout his short life, and Robert only lived 22 years, he never stopped growing. Each year, he would get an extra few inches to his gigantic height. When he was 21 years old, he passed John Rogan in terms of height, and that was the guy who had been recorded as the tallest guy ever before Robert came into play. Rob's predecessor, John Bud Rogan, born in Tennessee, was known as the tallest non-mobile person ever, measuring 8 feet 9 inches. His rapid growth started at 13 years old due to gigantism, leading to joint stiffness. Despite his condition preventing physical labor, Rogan made a living selling portraits and postcards. He declined offers to join carnivals and sideshows, preferring to maintain his independence. Rogan used a goat-pulled cart as a wheelchair. He was known for his deep voice and playful demeanor. Unlike Robert Wadlow, John Rogan didn't boast a reindeer-like weight. On the contrary, he only weighed 174 pounds, which is 2.5 times less than Robert. Zheng Jinlian from China rocked the world by becoming the tallest woman ever recorded in modern times. Despite her parents and siblings being of average height, she had a gene for towering greatness, but her stature was the result of a condition. The thing is, a tumor messed with her hormones and made her shoot up in height. By age 13, she had already been taller than the tallest guy of the same age. Zheng managed to graduate even with all the attention her height brought. People came from far and wide to meet her and gawk at her impressive stature. Even though doctors suggested surgery to remove the tumor causing her rapid growth, Zheng decided to keep it. She didn't want to lose her hair. She was quite the foodie too, eating tons of dumplings and rice each day to fuel her body. Sadly, health issues caught up with her, and she passed away in 1982. Her height was recorded as 8 feet 2 inches. She beat out Jane Bunford for the title of the tallest woman to ever walk the earth, and even had a moment as the tallest person alive from 1981 to 1982. By the way, Jane Bunford was the tallest recognized British person known to date. At a height of 7 feet 11 inches, she definitely stood out in a crowd. Born in Birmingham in 1895, Jane was an average Jane until 11 years old. At that age, she had an accident that changed her life forever. A head injury damaged her pituitary gland, causing an excess of growth hormone to send her height skyrocketing. Due to discomfort caused by her gigantic size, she had to drop out of school. Although she had opportunities to profit from her unique stature, Jane chose to live a quiet life. In her final years, she became a recluse due to the unwanted attention her height brought. Battling joint issues and a severe spinal curvature, Jane passed away at the age of 26. Hey, I have a quick question for you. Is height something that can change or not? It seems like we actually do get a little taller during the day and shrink back down at night. Let's thank gravity for this. But there was this one crazy case where a guy named Adam Rayner was super short at 21, only 3 feet and 10.5 inches. But then, he suddenly started growing like crazy. By the time he was 32, he was 7 feet 1.75 inches tall. Unfortunately, all that growth happened so fast that he ended up bedridden for life and didn't become a basketball star. Socks can be a real hassle for tall people. Don Kohler, who wore size 22 shoes, once said his biggest clothing issue was finding socks that fit. Luckily, he found a company in Pennsylvania that made custom socks for him. Don was really tall, one of only 24 people in history to reach over 8 feet tall. He was known as the world's tallest man from 1969 until he passed away in 1981, having grown to 8 feet 2 inches. He had a condition called gigantism, which made him grow abnormally, starting from the age of 10. Don was born in Denton, Montana, to parents who were taller than average. He had a twin sister, but she was 5 feet 9 inches. It was a record-breaking height difference of 2 foot 5 in between twins, as recognized by the Guinness World Records. Don worked as a salesman for 25 years using his height as an advantage when meeting with customers. If you too wear a larger shoe size, you know how frustrating trying to find the perfect pair can be. Treintje Kiever from the Netherlands definitely understood the struggle. Born in 1616, she is rumored to be the tallest woman in history, standing at 9 Amsterdam feet. Sadly, she passed away at just 17 years old. Her original shoes, which were over 14 inches in length, European size 54 or American size 22, are still on display. Her parents even took her to carnivals to make money by showing her off. Treintje first gained attention when she was 9 years old. At that time, she was already 6 foot 7 inches tall. A royal group, including the Bohemian king and his family, visited her in The Hague, curious about the 9-year-old girl taller than every man in Europe. The Netherlands is home to some seriously tall folks, with the average height of its residents being 6 feet. The US may have produced some behemoths in the past, but the current titles for the tallest man and woman are held by Turkey. Meet Rumeysa Gelgi, Turkey's towering treasure and Guinness World Records queen. At 24, this 7-foot-tall lady is not just the tallest woman alive, but also a front-end web developer, crime novel enthusiast, and swimming pro. Overcoming challenges with Weaver syndrome, she's a fighter and a voice for rare conditions. As of 2024, Sultan Qasim is the world's tallest living man. Back in 2009, he shot to fame when he was measured by the Guinness World Records. He was 8 feet 1 inches tall. Can you believe that? Only a handful of people in history have ever reached that height. This Turkish farmer didn't start sprouting up until he was 10 years old. And get this, everyone in his family is of average height except for him. He has a condition called pituitary gigantism. Being super tall definitely has its pros and cons for Sultan. He could easily help his mom with household tasks, but shopping for clothes and squeezing into a regular-sized car can be a real challenge. And playing professional basketball? Not in the cards, as he's just too tall for the courts. Sultan also holds the record for the largest hands on a living person.
What makes a giant, well, a giant? You know, big, enormous, you get it. Tough questions. It depends on who you ask. The ancient Greeks had cyclops, while ogres were spread out through all sorts of European folklore tales. The tallest person ever recorded was named Robert Pershing Wadlow, and he lived in the first half of the 20th century. He stood at an incredible 8 feet 11 inches tall, but had many medical issues throughout his life. Sadly, he only lived to celebrate his 22nd birthday. That's because Robert wasn't just tall. He had a condition affecting his human growth hormone, which didn't particularly make his life comfortable. Robert even had to wear leg braces in his adult years. During that same time, incredible discoveries were reported in North America. Some people claim to have uncovered weird-looking skeletons, much larger than previously associated with human beings. It immediately raised the question, did giants really used to roam our planet? Our story begins with the idea of a mound builder race. Some scientists back in the day claimed that these massive earthworks in places like the Mississippi Valley, called the Grave Creek Mound or the Great Serpent Mound, were built by some sort of prehistoric type of human, much larger and stronger than us Homo sapiens are today. From around 1812 to the 1860s, almost everyone in America writing about history was covering this mound-building race. However, not everyone agreed with the theory. There was this naturalist named Benjamin Smith Barton, for example, who warned about jumping to conclusions about giants. He believed that just because people discovered some big bones, they shouldn't immediately think of giants. But people didn't listen. Really? They simply wanted to believe about huge human-like creatures, despite not having any real scientific evidence. Newspapers were filled with these giant stories. They described finding giant skeletons, even featuring weird body parts. Con artists took advantage of the whole frenzy, with some putting together skeletons out of wood and rawhide and touring them as proof of the long-lost race of giants. Eventually, in the 1930s, an anthropologist from the Smithsonian took it upon himself to debunk the whole mystery. And his conclusions were straightforward. All those giant skeletons that were supposedly uncovered were either hoaxes or simply animal bones that were wrongly identified as belonging to humans. He also said that those who claimed to have discovered ancient giant remains were just not that good with human anatomy. You would think that's how the story ended. Well, it didn't. You see, people became so convinced that giants existed that they simply could not let go. Sound familiar? Because the Smithsonian was investigating these claims, some people started thinking they were up to something shady. They cooked up this theory that the Smithsonian scientists were secretly getting rid of giant bones to hide the truth about giants. This whole story survived through the years and made it all the way to 2014. It's when this internet article said that the Smithsonian used to have tons of giant skeletons but destroyed them back in the early 1900s. And the drama continued. A famed publication even looked into the past of some of those Smithsonian scholars to try and pick apart their credibility. So the Institute had to do some damage control. They've since added new people on the team whose job is to figure out if those bones were correctly collected and studied. Now, it wasn't just North Americans that claimed to have stumbled upon giants. The French had their own discoveries too. Their story takes us back to 1890, when an anthropologist was digging around a Bronze Age site in Castelnau, France. What he found were 3 bone pieces that looked like they came from a giant human. The findings included a massive thigh bone, a shin bone, and a regular upper arm bone known as a humerus. Now, if we put all these bones together and calculate the proportions, they lead us to this towering figure, somewhere between 10 and 11 feet tall. However, in 2022, contemporary scientists took another look at those bones. They concluded they most likely belonged to a cave bear, not a human. It wasn't that unusual for people back in the day to confuse giant animal bones with those of humans. Now, the truth is, our ancestors were in fact taller than we are today, despite them not being technically giants. The average human body has changed a lot over thousands of years. We're not as big and strong as our ancestors were. In fact, we've been on a bit of a downsizing trend, especially in the last 10,000 years, and it's because of a mix of factors. Our genes, the world around us, and how we live our lives all play a role. Way back around 40,000 years ago, European men were towering at around 6 feet. They had a seriously tough life, though, hunting and gathering all day. That lifestyle required a good muscle structure, and their African roots might have given them that extra height, which came in handy in warm climates. Moving on to 10,000 years ago, we can already see a big change in European males. They went down to 5 feet 4 inches on average. What happened was the climate was shifting, and people were increasingly relying on agriculture to provide for their families. It wasn't all sunshine and comfort, though. Sometimes failed crops and a not-so-diverse food meant a pretty unhealthy diet. Plus, being around farm animals more and more introduced some new medical issues to the mix. We're now around 600 years ago when the shortness continued. And yes, we can still blame it on poor diet and health. However, there seems to be a change in recent years. Today, European males are reaching an average of 5 feet 9 inches. And sure, the fact that we're eating more veggies and getting regular checkups at the doctor did help a lot. But it's also because of industrialization and living in cities. This has brought people from different backgrounds together, which is a good thing. It decreases the chances of human passing on genes that could cause problems. So, it's a combination of better living and genetics that's making us taller. We shouldn't give up on ancient giants quite yet, though. You see, experts believe they recently discovered the remains of such a person, who supposedly lived in ancient Egypt. Sometimes people can actually grow to large sizes due to a condition called gigantism, the same that made Robert Pershing Wadlow grow to such an impressive height. When some archaeologists were studying ancient Egyptian mummies, they came upon an interesting skeleton. What made it special was that they believed it might have belonged to a pharaoh, who would have been really tall, like 6 feet 6 inches tall. To put that in perspective, that's way taller than Ramses II, who was the tallest recorded Egyptian pharaoh and stood at about 5 feet 9 inches. These experts took a closer look at the newly found bones, especially the long ones, and found evidence of something called exuberant growth, which basically means this person's growth was off the charts. It's a clear sign of gigantism, they say. Now, this discovery is important because it makes this mummy the oldest case of gigantism in the world. No other Egyptian pharaohs were known to be giants. It's also fascinating because it tells us something about the health and nutrition of ancient Egyptian rulers. See, those pharaohs were probably better fed and healthier than regular people, which might explain why they could grow taller than the average person. Now, you might be wondering if being a giant had any drawbacks back then. Well, it's hard to say. I wasn't around then. Still, during those early dynasties in Egypt, they seemed to prefer shorter people, especially in royal service. There are a lot of ancient Egyptian stories featuring short-statured leaders and even higher spirits that locals looked up to. The reason why is still a mystery that we might never fully solve. But since this mummy was found in an elite tomb, it's possible that being a giant didn't have a social stigma attached to it at the time. Maybe he was, in fact, seen as special.
Hey there, curious history buffs! Have you heard the legend of the ancient race of giants of Nevada? Yes, I'm talking about actual giants that allegedly lived thousands of years ago. Now I know what you're thinking. Giants, really? Well, archaeological finds add fuel to this debate too. And here's where it gets interesting. Lovelock Cave was indeed used as a burial site, and some of the remains found there are much larger than average human bones. The cave is by the Humboldt Sink in western Nevada. It was once part of an enormous lake, which eventually dried up, leaving a number of smaller ones, including the Humboldt Sink. The cave became the home of the Site-Ka tribe. According to the legend, these red-haired giants were so big that they had to be buried in the cave itself. Indeed, later on, archaeologists discovered 8 to 10 foot tall skeletons. This legend started to unfold when a mining engineer named John T. Reed talked to the locals in 1886. Once Reed saw the cave, he knew he was onto something. The news spread soon, but the cave was attracting another type of attention too. The deposits of a fertilizer known as guano were discovered inside the cave. So a mining company began excavating the precious resource in 1911 and soon shipped more than 250 tons of the fertilizer to San Francisco. Unfortunately, some of the human remains and artifacts were neglected and lost in the mining process. This led to an official excavation in 1912 and 1924. After the top layer of guano had been mined, strange objects started to surface. Around the area, the earliest evidence of human habitation dates back about 4,000 years. The Lovelock culture lasted for some 3,000 years, and they left us with 10,000 stunning artifacts. The pits in the cave were like a series of time capsules hidden at different depths. Archaeologists determined the age of each pit by its depth. It turns out that many different groups used the cave for storage over a really long time, and the things they stored there give us a really cool glimpse into their cultures. It's like a giant ancient storage unit full of hidden treasures. What have the researchers found besides the giant bones, you might ask? Some other bodies were mummified using a method similar to the one applied by ancient Egyptians. These remains also had something in common with the bodies discovered as far south as Lake Titicaca. Both mummies had some red hair. Yet, there are scientists who believe this reddish hue is the result of the interaction with the environment in which the bodies stayed. So, while the story of the red-haired giants may be a wild and intriguing tale, not everyone is convinced. Some experts believe that the bones found in Lovelock Cave are simply the remains of prehistoric animals, like mammoths or sloths. But others insist that there's something more to the story. Other relics, such as finely crafted baskets and exquisite duck decoys made from tule fibers, were also found there. In any case, this cave is worth the attention it gets. By the way, you can still visit this cave today and see the pits of different depths with your own eyes. But let me tell you one thing. It's in a hot, dry, and isolated place. Archaeologists have made another discovery that seems to be straight out of a legend. They think they found the palace of the one and only Odysseus, who was the legendary Greek king of Ithaca and the hero of Homer's epic poem. Move over, Indiana Jones. We've got some real-life adventure happening here from around 1300 BCE. Apparently, this is the only palace mentioned in Homer's epic poems that hasn't been found. The excavations have been made on the Ionian Islands, and the view from the ruins found on the island of Ithaca are exactly as described in the Odyssey, says the professor who led the excavation team. Known to the ancient Romans as Ulysses, the Greek hero took 10 years to return home to Ithaca after the fall of Troy. For many years, Homer's other epic, called the Iliad, which tells the story of the protracted siege of Troy by the Greeks, was regarded as a myth too. But then, in the 1870s, Troy was rediscovered in modern-day Turkey's Çanakkale city. So, if they found Troy, who's to say they couldn't find Odysseus's home? The researchers were following Homer's words as a roadmap. The excavation site has a building complex with 2 levels. It has important finds, such as storerooms and workshops, a complicated drainage system, and fragments of pottery. It also has a well from the 8th century BCE, which is around the time when Odysseus is believed to have been the king. Yet, not everyone is convinced that the team has actually discovered the home of Odysseus. A British researcher named Robert Biddlestone insists that Homer's description of ancient Ithaca isn't very similar to the island that now has its name, and that Odysseus's kingdom was actually on the Isle of Cephalonia. However, Italian archaeologist Adriano La Regina might have a more realistic approach to this debate. He says that whether this find has a connection to Ulysses or not, what's more important is the discovery of this royal palace. Once upon a time, in a land far away, the Klamath Indians spread a legend about the creation of Crater Lake. Okay, maybe this land is not that far away, and it still exists. You can find it in south central Oregon, in the western United States. Anyway, the legend has it that this lake was formed in a vicious battle between 2 volcanoes, Mount Mazama and Mount Shasta. Then the spirits of Earth and the Sky, which are Lao, who ruled the below world, and Skel, the chief of the above world, joined the fight. It turned into a geological drama. During the battle, darkness veiled the land. The fight was over when Mount Mazama collapsed and sent Lao back into the underworld. Then the rain filled the pit and created a lake in the place where the mountain had once stood. Flash forward to our time. Scientists have discovered that Mount Mazama did erupt 7,700 years ago. Artifacts found in the area prove that the legend indeed contains some details about the explosion. The tale says that red-hot rocks were flying through the sky. This happened during the volcanic eruption that caused the mountain to collapse. This created the volcanic caldera, which later on got filled with water. What makes this legend came true story unusual is how long it has existed. According to researchers, these types of verbal stories lose their credibility within 600 to 700 years. That's why the legend about the creation of Crater Lake is so unique. So many generations, for hundreds of years, have been accurately passing down the information. This volcanic crater lake is now in a national park. It's famous for its deep blue color. The water in it is extremely clear. If you visit it today, the water you'll see won't be the same as for someone who will visit the place 250 years later. Because there are no rivers flowing into or out of the lake, the existing water evaporates and the lake gets filled again by rain and snowfall. Basically, every 250 years, the water is replaced. Plus, this lake is almost 2,000 feet deep, which makes it the deepest lake in the United States. Swimming is okay in the lake, but there's only one legal and safe trail to get to the shore. There are other activities, such as fishing and boat tours. Shared human experiences, such as birth, marriage, and aging, may explain why certain tales are shared globally. Similar struggles and obstacles faced by humans around the world generate similar themes in traditional stories about love, parenting, and mortality. So, do you have legends or tales you've heard of from your grandparents? Who knows? Maybe your ancestors too witnessed a cool historical event.
Now, we wouldn't call this island mystical unless there were tales of giants living here. The island of Gozo in Malta is the backdrop of an ancient legend. Malta is an island country located in the Mediterranean Sea, just south of Europe. It's a very strategically located archipelago. Throughout history, it was ruled by many different societies, such as the Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, and Carthaginians. One cold night, thousands of years ago, a farmer noticed the sky turn orange, then red, when he heard a loud thump. Although the ground seemed to be moving, this wasn't an earthquake. When he looked toward the woods, he saw a giant silhouette, taller than the trees. As he fearfully approached, he realized it was a woman, a giant woman. She introduced herself as Sansuna. Unlike the terrible giants of many tales, Sansuna didn't want to exterminate the human race. She was loving and caring. She told the farmer that she and her people could help protect their land from invaders. The locals were pretty interested in this offer. Since Malta is located in an important commercial route, it was constantly being invaded. The story says that Sansuna settled in Malta, and sooner rather than later, she was moving things around. And when I say things, I mean monoliths. Sansuna carried huge stones on her shoulder to build a magnificent temple called Gigantia, which means place of giants. She even did this while holding her half-giant, half-human kid on the other shoulder. Some say Sansuna lived exclusively on beans and honey, although others replaced honey with water. The funniest bit here is that Malta is the 10th smallest country in the world, but it somehow managed to host giants. Hey, go figure. The temple looked like a giant game of Tetris, with some stones weighing as much as 20 elephants. Some of these monolithic rocks are so heavy, scholars guess it would take 50 men working together to lift just one stone. Now, as much as this is entertaining, humans never proved giants were real, so this story couldn't be true. There's a brief mention of a species of giants called the Nephilim in some ancient texts. The Nephilims would have been terrible giants that wreaked havoc on the earth and only survived until the Great Flood. But nobody ever found real proof of this species really existing on Earth, until this came along. The world of Maltese archaeology unearthed quite a few shocking things in the past years. One of them are known as the hypogeum skulls. Hypogeum is the Greek word for underground, and this incredible site was discovered in the first decade of the 20th century. Back then, Malta's National Museum director received an important phone call. Someone had accidentally dug some impressive bones and asked him to come check it out. The hypogeum looked like an underground city, filled with mazes and rooms that stretched along multiple floors. They were all made with similar limestones as the Maltese temples above ground. The hypogeum was filled with important relics and artifacts. Scientists quickly understood that the hypogeum was built as a type of final resting place for locals. So, along with skulls, they found a lot of bones and skeletons. One of these artifacts were skulls, but these weren't regular human skulls. Rather, they were of the elongated type. To make matters worse, these skulls were hidden from the public for years. People started to talk and created a bunch of theories behind it. The truth is that this discovery was a turning point for Maltese archaeology, although scientists didn't know what to do with it. Some wondered if these skulls were natural or manipulated, since they knew some cultures in the world used head binds to alter their skulls. Other scientists threw in the hypothesis of little gray people or even the legendary giants. Some say that the elongated skulls could have been sculptures that worshipped otherworldly deities. There was no way to confirm any of these theories, so the question remained: who were the builders of Malta's megalithic temples? Now let's take a look at what scientists know. The Maltese megalithic temples have been standing strong since 3500 BCE, which is even older than the pyramids of Egypt. The main dilemma here is that these temples were built even before we invented writing, yet they required advanced technological skills to exist. The Gigantea Temple seems too absurd to have been built by humans. The South Temple has a corridor with 4 oval rooms on the sides, looking like a big shamrock leaf. In one of these rooms, scientists found altars decorated with spiral patterns. It looked like an altar of some sort, indicating early Maltese people used them for ritualistic purposes. The North Temple is similar but smaller, with a very low entrance that makes people crouch down to get inside. You get it? You need to bow down to their deities in order to get into this sacred place. I mean, one can't help but wonder about the secret reasons these ancient builders had to build such a huge temple. I'm thinking they probably cast one of Daenerys' dragons to move the monoliths around. Yeah, I'm joking here. But hey, remember the entrance to King's Landing? Yup, the series used the Medina Gates in Malta as the exterior of King's Landing during Episode 3 of Season 1. Anyways, back to the giants. The ritualistic theory of the whole thing won a few points when archaeologists uncovered these mysterious figures. They're popularly known as fat ladies. These tiny statues have round bodies and faces that show how much they enjoyed life. They kinda look like a miniature Sunsana, the giantess we talked about. Scientists believe these were statues that celebrated well-being and prosperity. It does prove that the people of the time had advanced craftsmanship skills, and they were pretty intentional with their constructions and art manifestations. One of these statues is known as the Sleeping Lady. This Neolithic piece of art depicts the figure of a large woman lying on her side sleeping. After studying it deeper, scientists guessed this statue was meant to represent the Great Reaper. It was found in the hypogeum, which we now know is a huge resting place. This specific statue is different from all the other fat ladies, starting with the hair and the embroidered skirt. Then there's this statue. This is supposed to represent an 8-foot-tall woman and the rim of her skirt. She was discovered in the most unusual of ways. A farmer was trying to plow his field, but he kept hitting large blocks of stone. All the way back in 1915, the farmer called Malta's National Museum director and asked him to come check it out. Some think this is all the proof you need to confirm that Sunsana was real. Others aren't all that sure. But that's not all. The place where this giant statue was buried revealed one of Malta's most impressive archaeological sites, the Tarsian temples. The temples were made from limestone blocks. Some are 20 feet tall and weigh around 20 tons. Zamet, the museum director, kept digging and discovered multiple sites made of megalithic stones. All of them supposedly built by Stone Age farmers, all stranded on a remote island in the Mediterranean Sea thousands of years ago. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, look at these temples in Manidra. This is probably the world's earliest calendar. On the equinoxes, the sun passes directly through the main doorway, straight down the central axis. On the solstices, there are two superb variations. During the summer solstice, the rays fall on the edge of the megalith to the left of the doorway, and during the winter, the rays fall to the right side of the doorway. It's astronomical precision at its finest. And what about the structures in the Hall Tarshan that we've already talked about? This complex is the oldest one in all of Malta. It was built with the purpose of doing animal offerings to deities. Scientists confirm this by unearthing numerous animal bones buried in the soil. They also found a great collection of spirals, indicating that the locals also used this temple for ritualistic purposes. Overall, there are 7 megalithic temples in Malta, each more impressive than the other. Scholars keep on digging to see if they can uncover the truth, much like researchers do with the pyramids of Egypt, the lost Mayan cities in the Americas, and other sites.
Wait, don't tell me that life on Earth has bubbled for about 3.5 billion years, and the biggest creature we got is the blue whale? I mean, not bad, but that doesn't sound nearly as fun as those cool giant creatures you get to see in movies. Yeah, you recognize the iconic roar here. It appeared on TV, in comic books, in video games, and in cinema. I mean, come on. It even got its own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on its 50th birthday. So, what would it take to get good old Godzilla from the TV screen to our streets? And we're talking about the beast that's really gigantic. In the original film from 1954, Godzilla was thought to be 164 feet tall. This was the perfect height for the monster to just peer over the biggest buildings in Tokyo at the time. But as further movies came, Godzilla became bigger and bigger. In theory, this would be the biggest animal that could exist and not end up crushed by the gravitational field of our planet. Even if we're talking about some tiny Godzilla of, let's say, 14,000 tons. To take the gravitational force of our planet and carry such weight, Godzilla must have some incredibly strong bones. And as an object gets bigger, its volume will actually increase faster than its surface area. Okay, wait, let's start small. So, cells are the building blocks of life, and they come in all shapes and sizes. But the thing is, cells have a problem when they try to grow too big. As they grow, their surface area, the outside, doesn't keep up with their volume, which means the inside. It's like having a big mouth but a tiny stomach. You can't digest all the food you want to eat. Why haven't I learned that already? Especially when I open my fridge for a midnight snack. So, if cells get too big, they can't get enough nutrients in and waste out fast enough. It would be like living in a very big house, but with just one tiny door to go in and out. Plus, that's not their only problem. Cells also need to be able to divide and replicate, and this task gets tricky as they get bigger. They need this thing called microtubules for that. It's sort of like a skeleton that gives them structure. But don't worry, evolution is a foxy little thing. There are some cells out there, like a specific type of invasive algae, that have found ways to break the rules and get really big. And they don't even need to divide to do that. This algae could pass as an aquatic fern that has fronds up to 31 inches long. But what you're looking at is just one big cell. It has multiple nuclei, though, which are like the control centers of cells. Plus, there are even some bacteria that are living in a symbiotic relationship with the organism, which means they help each other out when necessary. It's like having a bunch of different rooms inside one big house, with some roommates living there that help around from time to time. Then there's a monster alga known as the sailor's eyeball, which is like a giant ball of green slime. It can grow up to 2 inches in diameter, but is also considered to be just a single cell. My personal favorite would be this one. Again, we're talking about a single cell, but check out its stem and cap. It looks like a tiny little umbrella. It can grow up to 4 inches tall, which is definitely not bad for a single cell. Most cells are too small to see with the naked eye, but these fellas don't hesitate to break the rules. Now, when it comes to animals getting really big, there's a limit to their size. It's like trying to build a really tall tower. Eventually, it'll become too heavy and the base won't be able to support the weight anymore. Similarly, when an animal gets really big, its bones and muscles have to evolve to support all that weight, and it becomes more and more difficult to do so. In one of the movies, Godzilla was 390 feet tall. At that size, it would be really difficult for its heart to pump blood to its brain. And if it was a reptile, Godzilla would need to spend all of its time lying in the sun to stay warm. So we'd have to hide in the shadows, hoping some bigger animals that live in warm areas could keep it full. If Godzilla was a mammal, though, it would generate too much body heat and end up cooking itself. The biggest land animals we know of were sauropods, a type of dinosaur with a really long neck and tail. They could grow up to 131 feet long and weigh up to 70 tons, which could be as heavy as 10 elephants. Evolution was pretty efficient when it had to come up with its body plan. Sauropods ate plants. They had a smart way of eating that allowed them to stay in one spot and still find enough food. They could move their long necks around to reach plants so they didn't have to walk around too much or waste too much energy. Yeah, my kind of folks. That's impressive, but let's get realistic. Not many giant animals are happy to eat salad for dinner. If you had a giant beast such as Godzilla, you can expect it to go after its prey. And that becomes too hard for its body to support all that weight and perform all the necessary activities. The largest meat-eating dinosaurs were still pretty big, but not as big as the sauropods. The biggest one we know of is a fella called Spinosaurus, which was about 50 feet long. It managed to survive by eating fish and some other creatures that lived in the water. It would be so cool to have Godzilla in real life, if you have some safe basement where it won't find you, of course. But it's not likely some animal could really get bigger than our beloved sauropod. At least, not without running into some serious physical limitations. And have you ever wondered how big a plant could get? It turns out some trees have already reached amazing heights, such as the General Sherman, the largest living tree on the planet. It's more than 275 feet tall and has nearly 53,000 cubic feet of wood. It's gigantic, but still a little bit smaller than the Lindsay Creek French tree, the biggest tree ever recorded. It was a coast redwood 390 feet tall and had a volume of more than 90,000 cubic feet, which is as big as some skyscrapers. But it ain't easy for plants to get big either. When they're tall, it's tricky for them to get water from the roots to the leaves. Redwoods have a couple of tricks up their sleeves, though. For example, they absorb moisture from fog through their leaves. Plus, they have a wide base that gives them more support. If we want to build taller buildings, we also need to think about the challenges plants face, like how to build a good base that will support the structure and transport water and nutrients. If we're not just looking for height, we can take a peek at other massive organisms on our home planet, such as Pando. This is a male aspen forest in Utah that covers 107 acres and is basically one giant organism. It weighs almost 6,000 tons and is one of the biggest organisms on Earth. Perfect salad bowl for Godzilla. I mean, plants aren't the only organisms that can grow to massive sizes. There are fungi, like the honey mushroom, that can grow into a network of tiny threads called hyphae. They tend to spread out over big areas, and it's like a pretty big underground web, connecting everything together. One specimen in Michigan covers 90 acres and weighs about 400 tons. Now that's a lot of mushrooms.
So how come the world is still talking about a statue that only existed for a mere 54 years over 2,000 years ago? What made this impressive ancient construction so remarkable that we're still discussing it? I'm talking about the Colossus of Rhodes, of course. It's considered to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, along with the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Gardens of Babylon. There are a lot of mysteries surrounding this ancient statue, but let's look at some of the facts first, shall we? What we do know is that the local Rhodians decided to start a massive project once a Macedonian siege over their island was over. In other words, it was their way of honoring the higher powers for their victory. Using a lot of material left behind by the Macedonians, they started the construction of the Colossus, which is estimated to have taken about 12 years. Most contemporary descriptions of the sculpture agree that it stood about 105 feet tall. Now, just to compare, that's about the size of the Statue of Liberty today, which is 151 feet tall. It may not seem like a lot. I mean, Lady Liberty is currently ranked as the 52nd tallest statue in the world. The champion here would be the Statue of Unity in India, standing proud at an astonishing 597 feet. But for ancient times, that was quite an accomplishment. But is the similar height the only connection between the Colossus of Rhodes and the Statue of Liberty? Not really. We do know that they both also refer to Lady Liberty as the modern Colossus, since both statues were constructed as a symbol of liberation. There's even a plaque placed inside the pedestal of the New York statue, inscribed with the first verse of the sonnet, "The New Colossus," not like the brazen giant of Greek fame. To build this massive Colossus statue, they sure needed a lot of bronze. Some ancient records even recount that the construction required 27,000 to 29,000 pounds of bronze. Even for modern times, this is a lot, but back then, they even called it an operation that involved the bronze industry of the entire world. The man tasked with bringing the statue to life was Chares of Lindos, a local Greek sculptor. The whole construction took place from 294 to 282 BCE, but unfortunately, Chares never got to see the end result. We don't know for sure why that happened, but some records claim constructing the Colossus of Rhodes may have led him to complete bankruptcy, since he failed to accurately estimate the cost for the massive statue. Anyway, we still don't know for sure how it was possible to build a statue this big back in those days. They had none of the equipment we have today, like excavators or elevators. Some old records said that they had to invent a completely new, custom method to build it. It all happened on the location, put together piece by piece. They supposedly split the statue into many different sections, and the first one to be constructed was the feet. Once each section was done, huge mounds of earth were placed around it, so they could continue working on the next section above. However, these records were made more than 100 years after the Colossus was finished, so there's little we can say about the accuracy of this information. In all those 12 years, the local Greeks worked around the clock to build the Colossus of Rhodes. They started with a white marble base that they placed at the statue's feet. They then continued with some sort of an iron skeleton, to which they attached the bronze plates. Why did they choose bronze, though? Well, that was more for practical reasons, since bronze is stronger than iron and it can also sustain extreme weather conditions. More so, if you think about it, the statue was located pretty close to the sea, so the air surrounding it would have been pretty salty. That's why they needed to make it out of quite sturdy material. And what about the location? Well, that's something that has been up for debate for a long time. Researchers initially believed that the statue stood with each leg on either side of the Mandrake Harbor, one of many in the city of Rhodes, basically straddling its entrance. As imposing as that may sound, it was likely not the case. First of all, that would have meant the harbor would have to have been closed for the whole duration of the construction, which doesn't seem to match all the other records. More so, after the statue had fallen, it would have probably blocked the entirety of the harbor, which again doesn't seem to be mentioned anywhere. Most recent depictions say that it most likely stood either on the eastern side of the Mandrake Harbor or maybe even further inland. So, what happened to this impressive structure? Is there really nothing left of it to this day? And why did it survive for only 54 years, since it took so long to build and it was so important for locals? Well, as admired and valued as it was to the Greeks, an earthquake took the Colossus of Rhodes away from them. The story goes that because of the movement of the earth beneath it, the statue snapped at its knees and was completely laid on the ground. Nonetheless, the statue still continued to be admired for centuries. The Rhodians refused to rebuild it as they considered it a sign and did not dare intervene with destiny. By the middle of the 7th century, they had taken away what was left of the statue completely. Legend says it took about 900 camels to carry all the bronze away from the location. And what about the looks of the statue? This is also one aspect that is still shrouded in mystery. Even though it was a symbol of the locals' pride in maintaining their independence, they did not use the depiction of the statue for any of the coins they made, even though that was kind of customary. Other art historians do think, however, that the Colossus was similar to other depictions of the same mythological creature, a male figure that had rays of light rising from its head. The position of its hands is also still up for debate. Some say it might have even been holding a torch. We don't know if his hands were pointed straight down or whether the right arm was raised, like in similar representations in Greek mythology. The original might not be here for us to admire anymore, but there are some plans out there to rebuild it. A group of European architects intends to build a 21st century version of the ancient statue. This new construction is planned to stretch 500 feet tall. It should serve as a cultural center combined with a lighthouse. To make sure it won't have the same destiny as its ancient ancestor, these designers intend to use a lot of technology available today. Firstly, they plan to cover the whole exterior of the modern Colossus with solar panels so that the enormous building has enough electricity. They also intend to use modern resources to make sure earthquakes and wind forces won't affect the massive structure yet again. To do that, they plan to build the statue as a tripod structure, made from its 2 legs and a third pillar of support, constructed from the sash draped over the statue's arm and touching the ground. They also plan to place heavy steel support around the base for counterbalance. They even thought of a suspension system that would permit the statue to rock back and forth, making it a bit more flexible and able to resist all the various weather conditions. The manufacturer's suggested retail price on this project is quite high though, estimated at around $283 million. Supporters of the modern Colossus are optimistic as they are certain they can raise that impressive amount of cash through crowdfunding and private investments.
Strange and amazing items are discovered often, but figuring out what our ancestors were up to is pretty tough. Especially when all you have are just some rusty cups and cave drawings. It's no surprise that even the experts in lab coats sometimes make mistakes. But it's not just about dusty plates and huge stones. Sometimes there's even humans with large heads. So grab your digging tools and let's travel back to ancient times to explore incredible societies that even scientists can't fully explain. Sardinia may look idyllic now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't fancy visiting it 3,000 years ago. Rumor has it, terrible giants roamed around this island back then. People even talk about finding human skeletons over 13 feet tall there, although nobody's ever shown anything to prove it. But the stories will make you wonder because some weird stuff has definitely happened. In 1974, over 5,000 pieces of broken stone artifacts were found in a part of the island called Monte Prama, but instead of being displayed in a museum, they were locked up in an underground vault for about 30 years. Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it? When they were finally displaced in 2005, scientists put the pieces together to find statues of 38 giant men standing 8 feet tall. Not quite as tall as the legendary skeletons, but still pretty huge. It's thought these statues were made by the Nuragic people, who lived on the island a long time ago. Besides giant statues, they also built over 8,000 massive stone buildings. Perhaps Nuragic weren't giants themselves, but they definitely liked their things big. I do too. I like a big number of likes on our videos. That would be pretty great. Thank you if you liked this and subscribed. Now back to the video. You and I are pretty smart, but we might not be the smartest humans ever. Actually, we might not even be the smartest species. Since 1913, some skull fossils found in South Africa have hinted at a possibly smarter contender called Boskop man. This human-like species might have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago. Their skull suggests they had really big heads, which means their brains could have been 30% bigger than ours. Wow! Their average IQ could have been around 149, making them among the smartest 0.05% of people today. But if a Boskop brainiac was so much smarter, why are they not around and we are? Well, bigger isn't always better, you know. Our brains are a lot bigger than our ape relatives, mainly in the prefrontal cortex. This part helps with high-level tasks like making decisions, remembering things short-term, and being aware of ourselves. The parts of the brain that handle our senses and movements haven't really grown much. So, maybe the Boskops spent too much time dwelling on the past rather than doing practical things like hunting. But this is all just guessing. We really don't know what happened to these clever cousins of ours. Some people even argue that Boskops weren't any different from us, with the only evidence being parts of skulls. The jungle is huge. Did you know the Amazon rainforest is home to about 30% of all the world's plant and animal species? That's impressive. However, the history of one native species, humans, has long puzzled scientists. The mysterious Kasarabe people lived here for hundreds of years and then vanished around 1400 AD. People thought the Amazon only had a few scattered tribes, but recently we discovered big, unusual shapes in the ground called geoglyphs. These might look like simple shallow ditches, but they're actually the remains of a vast civilization that spread over 5,000 square miles and includes about 450 markings, some as wide as 1,300 feet. That's insane! They likely contained ceremonial buildings and could have hosted up to 1 million people as recently as 550 years ago. Thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which uses a safe laser to map the forest without harming it, we can explore deeper. In 2019, some scans showed miles of raised roads and pathways and even pyramids over 70 feet tall. They found 26 separate settlements, 2 of which were at least 250 acres each. Damn, that's like 330 soccer fields. It's not certain what happened to the Kasarabe people. Maybe European conquistadors drove them out. Maybe the most baffling ancient civilization is one we've never actually found a trace of. Yep, I'm talking about Atlantis, the grand city that supposedly sank into the ocean. The first mentions of Atlantis come from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who talked about a great city near the Strait of Gibraltar. But for ages, everyone just thought Plato made up Atlantis as a perfect version of his own Athens. So why, about 12,000 years after it supposedly vanished, do we still wonder if it might be real? Well, in the 19th century, U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book giving 13 reasons why he thought Atlantis was more than just a myth. Then, in 1965, some folks thought they actually found Atlantis when they discovered the Richat structure, a massive 25-mile-wide dome in Mauritania, Africa. It's so big that you can see the whole thing from space. 2 astronauts flying over the Sahara Desert spotted this giant eye staring back at them and thought they'd made the discovery of a lifetime. Unfortunately, there's no solid evidence linking this structure to Atlantis. It's believed to have formed from volcanic activity about 100 million years ago. But it does look suspicious, doesn't it? Still, we're no closer to knowing the truth. Imagine going back to about 3,300 BCE and finding yourself in South Asia. Welcome to the Harappan civilization. These people were way ahead of their time. They had cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, complete with baked brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, and even public baths. This place might have had over 5 million people, making it one of the densest regions at the time. They also invented a system of standardized weights that was incredibly useful for traders. And trading they did. These people had connections stretching all the way to the Middle East, thanks to their great skills in metallurgy. They even had a form of ancient branding. The seals were used to stamp clay on tray goods. Despite being so advanced with a thriving urban life, there's a whole bunch of mystery shrouding their language and script. We've got bits and pieces of their writing, but no one's deciphered them yet, even with all the technology we have today. We also still don't know how exactly their society worked. It looks like they didn't flaunt their social status as much as other civilizations. No grand palaces or massive monuments. Instead, their largest buildings might have been granaries. They sure were practical. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Around 1800 BCE, this bustling civilization started to decline, possibly due to shifts in river patterns. As the environment changed, the Harappans packed up, moving towards more hospitable lands. Ever heard of the Minotaur? The beast with a bull's head and a man's body, hunting the bravest travelers in a massive maze. Well, this wasn't just any old tale. It was one of the most popular dramas of the ancient world, and it was inspired by this place, the island of Crete. The Minoans lived here during the Bronze Age. They had stunning palaces, amazing frescoes, and a culture so rich it still fascinates historians to this day. They built places like Knossos, which was so complex with its multi-story buildings and elaborate hallways that it might have inspired the whole labyrinth myth. Their engineering was so ahead of its time that even their drainage systems were more advanced than what many of us have today. Let me know in the comments which of these stories you find the most fascinating, and thanks for watching.
You know, scientists make discoveries that change the world, but even they can face mysteries. Here are 10 things that have baffled scientists. Imagine that you constantly hear a low-frequency hum, and no one can trace its source. Roughly 4% of the world's population hears the hum. It's a geography-free sound. I mean, people all around the world hear it, so the name varies from Taos hum to Auckland hum, depending on the region where it gets generated. The sound is just on the threshold of human hearing. People hear it less when they're outside, and it gets louder indoors, especially at night. What's even scarier is that you cannot unhear it once you've heard it. Some folks say it started in London around the time of Charles Dickens, who wrote A Christmas Carol, and the low-frequency sound actually comes from the humbug. Or not. Actually, the earliest cases were recorded in Bristol, UK, dating back to the mid-1970s. Scientists have various theories about where the hum comes from and why only some people can hear it, yet they don't have a clear answer. It could occur when ocean waves move along the ocean floor. They shake the Earth when they collide with continental shelves. Or this might be happening because of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Oh, and how about ultra-low frequency radio signals used to communicate with submarines or even 5G? Upsweep is another type of unidentified sound. It was discovered in 1991 in the Pacific Ocean. The sound is high enough to be recorded throughout the ocean. Scientists theorize that the sound could be related to underwater volcanic activity. Interestingly, the volume of the sound has been diminishing compared to its volume when it was first discovered, yet it still can be detected. Plus, it's seasonal. It reaches its highest volume in spring and fall. Is it related to seasonal changes? No one really knows for sure. The next mysterious thing is a cone-shaped monument found in the Sea of Galilee in Israel. This monument was discovered accidentally by sonar scanning in 2003, but the findings were published only in 2013. The monument weighs 60,000 tons. It was once submerged by rising waters. Archaeologists say the monument is enigmatic because they can't figure out where it's from. They don't know what it's connected to or its function. So this big and unusual thing remains a mystery. Now let's move to Göbekli Tepe, Turkey. This place offers you one of the most archaeologically significant sites in the world. Why is it important? Well, it has massive carved stones about 11,000 years old. To put it in perspective, they're 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Ancient people placed these stones before they began farming or crafting metal tools or pottery. So the existence of this place goes against the chronology of civilization we're familiar with, where people farmed first and built second. Apparently, it wasn't like that. In any case, a good question is, what was the purpose of this site? Was it built to worship some spirits? Yep, archaeologists believe it might be the world's oldest temple. Okay, say this with me. Paleodictyon notusum. Yeah, I know it sounds like a chemical formula. This is a living fossil found deep down on the ocean floor. A creature makes these hexagonal burrows, that for sure. Yet scientists can't identify the artists. Now, what do I mean by living fossil? Well, Paleodictyon notusum is a creature believed to produce a burrow nearly identical to Paleodictyon fossils. Is it a worm-like animal that made them? Scientists don't know. One thing is clear, this isn't some random stuff created by geological forces. Now, speaking of fossils, take a look at this giant one. Its informal name is Godzillius. It was discovered in 2011 by an amateur paleontologist. This is a scientist who studies the history of life on Earth by analyzing fossil records. Anyway, back to Godzillius. It's almost 7 feet in length and 9 feet tall if you were to measure it upright. This fossil is 450 million years old, coming from the time when Cincinnati was underwater. It might be a fossilized algae mat, but some scientists have different opinions. This is a massive tunnel found in South America. The tunnel is at least 8,000 to 10,000 years old. At first, researchers discovered a couple of colossal burrows. They were enormous and neatly constructed. Geologists were amazed, saying they had never seen such structures before. There's no known geologic process to explain their formation. I mean, researchers have known about the burrows since the 1930s, but back then they believed that these tunnels were just some sort of archaeological construction, until they discovered huge claw marks on the walls and ceiling. They reasoned that some extinct species could be the ones to have left these marks. Many geologists strongly believe they've found the burrows of giant ground sloths and armadillos. The structure is the largest known burrow from the Paleolithic age in the Amazon. Yet experts have many questions. How come such a deliberate-looking structure could form naturally? A researcher then discovered another strange cave. This one was hundreds of miles away from the massive tunnel. Fast forward, there are now more than 1,500 burrows from the Paleolithic age found in Brazil. What's even more interesting is that some of these caves are connected to tunnels that sometimes lead to chambers. I'll continue with a natural phenomenon. What if I told you that every year, especially in October, fireballs appear on the Mekong River in Thailand? According to legends, Naga fireballs are a call for Buddha to return to Earth, and river serpents are the ones making these calls. Well, that's a myth, but what does science say about it? Is it related to a flammable gas? There are no clear answers yet. These fireballs appear to rise from the water. They can go as high as almost 990 feet. They're like fireworks, disappearing rapidly. They typically glow with a reddish or orange color. I'll mention some legends too, because why not? They're thrilling. And it would be a shame not to include the one about the lost city of Atlantis. As you may know, the legend says that Atlantis submerged into the ocean around 11,000 years ago. Since then, not just scientists, but also treasure hunters and philosophers have been searching for the lost world. Could Bimini Road be a trace? In 1968, a diver found strange stones off the coast of North Bimini Island in the Bahamas. The stones look human-made. It's like they were evenly spaced out and laid in an orderly row. It baffled scientists, but not for long. Carbon dating analysis of the blocks revealed that geological forces created the road naturally. There weren't any tool marks or signs indicating that the blocks had been stacked or something. The research is continuing, but yeah, scientists generally believe that the rocks were created by erosion. Well, I guess the time of Atlantis hasn't come yet. Okay, picture this. You're wandering on the beach, and you see dozens of octopuses walking past. In 2017, a group of people from Wales witnessed exactly this. Why did these creatures come out of the ocean? No one knows the answer. The group reported that they had seen 20 to 30 octopi crawling on the sand. The people looked for some signs of injury, but found nothing. They said that they had carried the animals back to the ocean. Interestingly, these creatures kept crawling onto the shore when people were asleep. Experts say that it's hard to be sure of the reason that pushed the animals to the beach without conducting a physical examination. They're still speculating about the reason behind this unusual and rare occurrence. Could it be overcrowding? Furthermore, the octopi were well armed. A separate study points out that the more fishers hunt large animals that feed on octopuses, the more the octopus population grows. Maybe that's why these creatures have to go farther to find food or shelter. But without proper research, these are only theories. There's a lot we don't know about space, too. So here's a bonus fact about the yellowish source of life in the solar system. Scientists have discovered a new type of wave inside the sun. These waves move in the opposite direction to the sun's rotation. Plus, they move super fast, so fast that it's beyond our understanding. Researchers have different theories about the function of the waves. If they figure out their role, this could give them additional insight into the processes happening inside the sun. And yes, the octopi were well armed.
You're walking down the street. You see a strange-looking antique shop called Ageless Trinkets of Mr. Bright. You're curious, so you enter there. You take a look at all the weird stuff. Suddenly, an old folded parchment paper catches your attention. It's a world map, but something's off with it. Instead of showing the countries as you know them, it shows the locations of 4 mythical lost worlds and civilizations. Mr. Bright, the shop owner, comes next to you after realizing your shock. This map won't let you find these places or anything, but I can explain to you the legends behind them if you want, he says. Let me begin with Atlantis. You might know it as Aquaman's underwater kingdom, but Atlantis, the fictional island, was actually first introduced in 2 of Plato's works. According to him, Atlantis was a highly advanced civilization that existed about 9,000 years before his own time, and its story had been passed down by poets, authors, and others. He wrote about Atlantis and its citizens to give a moral lesson and to teach about the dangers of arrogance, as well as the eventual downfall of those who are after too much power. In his dialogues, Plato stated that Atlantis was a great and powerful empire that was respected in all parts of the world. It was founded by beings who were half deities and half human, and became a great naval power after a while. Being an island filled with gold, silver, and other precious metals certainly helped their case. But besides that, it was also known for its breathtaking architecture and state-of-the-art technology, as well as its countless rare and exotic wild animals. Atlanteans were proud of their great achievements and the perfection of their civilization, but their excessive pride was going to bring their downfall. They believed they were so superior that they could gain control over any nation. This led them to launch a series of invasions. They conquered many of the Mediterranean lands, but when it was time to enter Athens, Athenians pushed back with an extraordinary force, so the Atlanteans were finally defeated. Plato stated that deities then got angry at Atlanteans because of how wicked, greedy, and immoral they became. So they punished them by sending earthquakes, which caused Atlantis to sink beneath the sea. Although the earliest written records of Atlantis were Plato's works, some people still believed his story to be based on truth and tried to identify the island of Atlantis with actual countries. Some people suggested it may have been located in the Mediterranean Sea, near the coast of Spain or Italy. Others thought it may have been located in the Caribbean, off the coast of Central or South America, but there was no solid evidence to support any of these claims. One theory, in particular, seemed more plausible than the others, though. Located in the Aegean Sea, the island of Santorini was the home of a highly advanced Minoan society. However, due to a huge volcanic eruption, it was destroyed about 3,600 years ago, causing the Minoan civilization to suddenly disappear. These similarities between the fictional Atlanteans and the historical Minoans made Santorini a good candidate for the speculations. Yet again, there were still major flaws with it, such as how the time when Plato said Atlantis was destroyed doesn't coincide with the time of Santorini's eruption. So Atlantis still continues to be regarded as nothing more than a popular legend in the scientific world. Now, let's move toward the northeast direction on the map, Mr. Bright says. According to Celtic Breton mythology, there once was a magnificent city called Ys, also known as Caris, that towered over Douarnenez Bay in France's Brittany region. It was the most wealthy city in the entire Atlantic. It was especially famous for its beautiful gardens and buildings, and its citizens were all living comfortably and happily there. Dahut, who was King Gradlon's daughter in Breton legends and literature, had a deep love for the sea. She begged her father to build a city at the edge of the sea, and that is how the city of Ys was established. Little did she know that she would be the one responsible for the destruction of her father's beloved gift. You see, since the city was surrounded by the sea, it needed to be protected by a dike equipped with floodgates, and these gates could only be opened at low tide. And the only one who had the keys to these gates was the king himself. One day, a handsome red knight arrived at the city, but couldn't pass the gates. Dahut was so taken by him that she wanted to let him in. She knew that her father was the keeper of the only key to the city, so she sneaked into his room and stole it from him. Then she gave it to the Red Knight so that he could enter the city and they could be together. However, the Red Knight turned out to be the Prince of Darkness, and he intentionally left the gate open to the raging sea. The waves soon swallowed all of Ys. King Gradlon was able to escape on his magical horse, but Dahut couldn't. She turned into an evil mermaid who lured sailors into the sea. Today, if you go to Quimper, a city in Brittany, northwest France, you can find the statue of King Gradlon riding on his horse. Although the city of Ys is a legend, Brittany coast locals believe that on the days when the waters are calm, you can still hear the tolls of the city bells deep under the sea, if you listen carefully. Mr. Bright then points at the Indian Ocean on the map and says, "Now, have you heard about Lemuria?" Back in the mid-1800s, a few scientists suggested that there was once a continent that existed in the Indian Ocean, somewhere close to the south of modern-day Sri Lanka. The first one to popularize this theory was the British lawyer and zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater. In his paper, The Mammals of Madagascar, he stated that he found lemur fossils in India, and not in Africa. However, this discovery was extremely shocking to him because of the fact that lemurs' original homeland, Madagascar, is much closer to Africa. He proposed that this was possible only if some larger continent connected the two once. He stated that this continent must have eventually sunk to the ocean floor. He then named it Lemuria, and hence the theory was born. People who came after Sclater took his theory a step further and thought that Lemuria was also the home of an extinct race of humans called Lemurians, who had 4 arms and enormous bodies, and were also the ancestors of modern-day humans, as well as lemurs. Of course, as new scientific discoveries were made on plate tectonics, evolution, and the study of DNA, the theories regarding the fictional continent called Lemuria were debunked. The last fictional land on the map is Agartha, Mr. Bright says. Taking its roots from Eastern mysticism, one legend says there's a kingdom called Agartha that is located deep beneath the surface of the earth. It's where all 4 corners of the world are connected by paths and tunnels. It is said that there's a secret entrance into Agartha hidden in the Gobi Desert, and it's built by Agarthans themselves using advanced technology that can't be detected by us, the surface folks. According to some beliefs, Agartha exists to counterbalance the energies of those who live above the surface. While we live in a state of rush and heightened emotions, this world beneath us is the total opposite. Some even say that those who escaped Atlantis fled here to continue their lives inside the Earth's core. And yet, others think it's actually a land that's crawling with all kinds of monsters. But there's no need to be scared, since modern science proved Earth's core is not actually hollow and is a solid hot iron ball. So you can cancel your journey plans to the center of the Earth if you've made any. Thanks, Mr. Bright. You can feel the waves brushing up against you. You wake up and see that you're a giant standing up on 2 feet in the sea. So much water starts dripping down like rain. You're way taller than the Statue of Liberty. You look at your hands and compare them to a small hot dog stand below you. You pick it up and fit it on the palm of your hand before crushing it by accident. Suddenly, you feel a slight sting on your ankle. You look down and see that some people are shoving you away, while most people are running away in fear. Some are taking pictures of you, while others are shouting at you to go away. You take a step to the main road and crush a car with no one inside. The people below you disperse like ants. You walk further into the city and notice there's a huge wall surrounding the rest of the city. You walk towards the city, crushing everything below you on your way. You see other giants stand up on the horizon near the sea and walk toward the barricaded city. Something is calling all of you to go there. Many people stand on the wall and sound the alarm. More people join them to defend the wall. Others evacuate and hide in tiny holes. You notice some of the giants have very odd features and disproportionate limbs. Some are walking on all fours, while some have really long arms that can reach anything. You move a bit when you accidentally almost step on someone. She stands still. You pick her up and put her on your eye level. Both of you are maintaining eye contact. You place her on your shoulder while the other giants walk past you towards the city. They push and shove you while you're standing still. They break through the wall without any effort and ruin the city. For some reason, you snap out of this trance that was drawing you to the city. You turn around and head back to the sea with the woman still on your shoulder. You reach the deepest end of the sea and are still walking. The woman is scared and doesn't know what to do. You place her on a small island and stare at her. She can't see the sun because your head is in the way. For a while, you leave her there while you bask in the sun, trying to make sense of why you're on this planet and what made you want to save this woman. Nighttime comes and you're feeling sleepy. The woman falls asleep under a tree. You stand still while the waves rock you back and forth. Suddenly, the waves get rougher and you feel something moving in the water. You look around, but it's too dark to see what's going on. You quickly pick up the woman and place her on your shoulder. She wakes up. You see the giants swimming and walking towards you, screaming. They start chasing you, trying to catch up with you. You walk as fast as you can, disturbing the water and breaking the ocean floor. You see a cargo ship in front of you and move it aside carefully, not to damage it. But the giants chasing after you don't seem to care about the ship and sink it while trying to get to you. You feel you've reached shallower grounds, and so you start running. You're in a new country that's been leveled by the giants. The buildings are completely flat, and the debris is scattered like small breadcrumbs. In the distance, you can see some more giants waking up by the beach and staring at you. They can smell the human on your shoulder and start chasing you. They're also strange looking and have unusual features. There's no place to hide in the open, so you head to the mountains. Over there, you can hide in the valley near a large waterfall. You notice that your skin starts changing color, and you blend in with the environment. Every giant has a unique feature for them to discover. Apparently yours is changing your skin color. The woman on your shoulder is asleep. You look at her and start feeling a sense of sympathy, like looking at a pet. You're not the same as the other giants. You don't crave destruction, but instead want to help humans. You hear some giants walking in the distance. You take a peek and see some new giants that are 3 times bigger than you. They're patrolling around looking for you, and they're getting closer. You accidentally make some noise, and they spot you. They start running after you. You get up and start running away. You're sprinting through some rough terrain. Some other giants jump in front of you, while the ones chasing you stand behind you. You're surrounded by 5 giants that are all 3 times bigger than you. You place the woman down in a safe place and prepare to protect yourself. They try to tackle you from all sides, but you jump and dodge them. The biggest one gets his hands on you and tries to pin you down, but you slip out and push him away. The rest of them try to catch you, but you move and avoid their grasp. You see a steep cliff and head over there while they're following you. You have your back to the cliff while they're inching their way to you. They jump at you, but you duck down. They fall over the cliff and into the ocean. The biggest one is still there, since it knew what you were up to. One-on-one, you have no chance against him. You can smell the woman trying to run away into a stampede of giants heading your way. Your skin color changes, and you slip through the alpha giant and rush to the woman to save her. The alpha isn't as fast as you, so you can easily outrun it, but the stampede is about to trample her. You jump in front of them and catch the woman. The other giants are startled and angry because you saved the woman. All of the giants know about you now and are out to get you. A few days later, and they seem to be off your tail. You're now in the middle of the desert. The woman is still on your shoulder. She built herself a small shelter where she could sleep without being disturbed. You're trying your best to get out of the desert since anyone can spot you. You're tired and are in need of water. You're barely carrying your feet in the sand. You sit down, trying to keep your head up, but the sun is too intense. You're sweating a lot, and it's dripping down on the woman. She tries to speak with you, but you can't understand what she's saying. You're getting weaker and can't move anymore. It's only noon, so the sun is at its peak. You create a shady spot for the woman with your hand to protect her from the burning sun. The day passes and the night arrives. You spent all day in the sun and are now in the desert cold. It's freezing. You cup the woman and put your other hand on top to create a warm dome to protect her from the cold wind. It's pitch dark and you don't know where you're going. You just keep walking and stepping on sand dunes everywhere you go. It's daytime again. You see a large footprint of a giant like no other. Looks like it's even bigger than the huge one by the cliff. You run away as fast as you can, but there's nowhere to hide. Suddenly, you see it standing still. It towers over every other giant you've ever encountered. It's sleeping and gaining energy from the sun. Some giants are accustomed to different climates and terrains. This one is tall, and it can reach the sun for more sunlight. You tiptoe around it, making sure not to wake it, but it can feel everything around it. It's startled and starts chasing you until you reach the ocean. He isn't a fan of water, so he stays on the surface, screaming at you as you swim off.